My name is Candace. I'm 30 years old and I run the largest ski resort in Colorado. We won't agree to any surgery. That is what my father said to the neurosurgeon while I lay on a trauma stretcher, a neck brace locking my jaw, my vision blurring from the morphine. He didn't scream it. He didn't cry. He said it with the same casual tone he used to order a scotch at the country club. No hesitation, no trembling hands. It was 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday at Denver Health. I had been airlifted in from the mountain after a cable line snapped during a safety inspection. The attending surgeon, a man with tired eyes and blood on his scrubs, was trying to explain the urgency. "Mr. Vance, her spinal cord is compressed. If we don't decompress the vertebrae in the next hour, the paralysis will be permanent. She has a fighting chance, but we need your consent now." My father didn't even look at the x-rays. He looked at his watch. A fighting chance to be what? A vegetable, a burden. He smoothed the lapel of his coat. "No. We aren't doing this. Let nature take its course." My mother was standing next to him. She wasn't looking at me either. She was looking at her reflection in the glass door of the trauma bay. "It's for the best, doctor," she said, her voice sounding like dry leaves. "We can't let her suffer. Just make her comfortable." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the brace off my neck and tell them I was awake, that I could hear every word. But the shock had locked my vocal cords. I could only stare at the ceiling tiles and listen. The doctor pushed back. "Sir, this is a life-saving procedure. She is young. She is strong. You are effectively signing a do not resuscitate order." My father stepped closer to the bed. He leaned in not to kiss my forehead, but to check if my eyes were closed. Then he delivered the line that killed the daughter I used to be, and birthed the enemy I was about to become. He looked the doctor in the eye and said, "I told you no surgery. When there is a death certificate, then I will sign. Until then, stop wasting our time." He turned around and walked out of the ER. My mother followed him, pausing only to adjust her scarf. They left me there to die. Not because they couldn't afford the surgery, our family is worth millions, but because I was the only thing standing between them and a quick sale of the resort. They thought the avalanche on the mountain had finished me. They were wrong. And they forgot one crucial detail: I wasn't just their daughter. I was their boss. And I had a backup plan they never saw coming. Before we continue, I have a serious question for you. If your family chose money over your life, would you forgive them, or would you destroy them? Pause the video and tell me in the comments below, forgive or destroy. I really want to know what you would do. Now let's go back to the moment. Everything changed. 6 months before the monitors beeped in that sterile trauma room, I was hanging 40 feet above the ground in a blizzard, clinging to the maintenance ladder of Tower 12. The wind in the Rocky Mountains cuts differently at night. It screams like a living thing, searching for any gap in your parka to freeze the sweat on your skin. I wasn't just the owner of Silver Peaks. I was the head mechanic, the payroll manager, and the janitor when the pipes burst. My grandfather, Earl Vance, had built this mountain retreat from dirt and timber, and I was the only one in the bloodline who knew how to keep the machinery running. Through the swirling snow, I looked down at the main lodge, a sprawling structure of cedar and stone glowing warmly against the dark slopes. Inside, a very different world existed. My family was hosting their annual winter solstice gala. While I was hacking rime ice off a frozen sensor so the lifts would run for tourists the next morning, my father, Roger Vance, was likely pouring a 20-year-old scotch and taking credit for the record-breaking quarter I had engineered. I climbed down my boots, crunching heavily on the packed powder, and entered the lodge through the service entrance. The transition was jarring. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roasted duck, and wood smoke. I walked into the great room, still wearing my grease-stained heavy gear, creating a puddle of melting snow on the Persian rug. "Candace, honestly?" My mother, Beverly, sighed, looking up from her conversation with a local senator. She adjusted her diamond earrings, looking at me as if I were a strayed dog that had wandered in. We have guests. You look like a roughneck. Someone has to make sure the guests don't get stuck on the lift tomorrow. Mother, I said, stripping off my gloves. Sitting by the fireplace was my younger sister Whitney. She was 24, beautiful in a vacuous way, and currently scrolling through her phone with a scowl. Speaking of stuck, Whitney snapped, not even looking up. My black card got declined at the boutique in Aspen this morning. It was humiliating, Candace. Fix it. I didn't freeze the card by accident, Whitney. I replied, my voice steady despite the exhaustion. You spent $12,000 on handbags in a week. The corporate accounts are for resort operations, not your wardrobe. Roger stepped in, then flashing his practiced CEO smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Now, Candy, don't be so harsh. The girls need to maintain an image. It's part of the brand. The brand is solvency, Dad. I shot back. And we aren't selling. The room went quiet. That was the elephant in the room. For months, a rival conglomerate, Apex Resorts, had been circling us like wolves. They wanted to buy Silver Peaks, demolish the historic lodge, and turn it into a generic luxury condo complex. Roger wanted to sell. Desperately. I walked past them to the office, locking the door behind me. I knew why he was desperate. I had seen the ledgers. Roger wasn't just bad with money, he was drowning. He had leveraged his personal assets into high-risk venture capital schemes and underground gambling debts in Las Vegas. The figure was staggering, nearly $5 million owed to men who didn't send overdue notices. They sent enforcers. But he couldn't sell the resort to pay them off. Grandpa Earl had been wise. His will left the estate in a strict trust. I held 51% of the voting stock. Roger and Beverly held minority shares that entitled them only to monthly dividends. As long as I was the acting trustee, the mountain belonged to the Vance family, and Apex couldn't touch it. I was the firewall protecting my grandfather's legacy from my father's incompetence. Later that night, long after the guests had left, I went downstairs for a glass of water. The library door was cracked open. I heard the clink of glass against crystal and Roger's low, frantic voice. They gave me until the end of the quarter, Bev. If I don't liquidate the equity, they're going to start seizing personal assets. The cars, the house in the Hamptons, everything. Can't you reason with her? Beverly's voice was shrill, panicked. Reason with Candace. She's exactly like her grandfather, stubborn as a mule and twice as ugly. Roger spat. I froze in the hallway shadows. She'll never sign the sale to Apex. Never. There was a long silence followed by the rustling of paper. What is that? Beverly asked. The original trust document, Roger murmured. I've been reading the bylaws. There is a contingency clause. Section 4, paragraph B. He read it aloud, and the words drifted into the hallway like poison gas. In the event that the primary trustee, Candace Vance, becomes deceased or suffers permanent physical or mental incapacitation, all voting rights and operational control shall revert to the legal guardian or next of kin. Permanent incapacitation, Beverly repeated, slowly testing the weight of the words. So if something happened, if she couldn't run things anymore, then we would be in charge, Roger said. We could sign the deal with Apex the next morning. Checkmate. I stood there in the dark, my hand hovering over the light switch. I didn't flip it. I didn't storm in and scream. I just felt a coldness settle in my chest that was far deeper than the winter storm outside. I told myself they were just venting, just drunk and desperate. Parents didn't actually hurt their children for money. That was the stuff of movies, not real life. I went back to my room and locked the door, telling myself I was being paranoid. I didn't know then that the conversation in the library wasn't a hypothesis. It was a rehearsal. And the snowmobile accident that would shatter my spine 6 months later wasn't going to be an accident at all. The following Tuesday morning, the air in the Vance's kitchen was thick enough to choke on. I was pouring coffee when Roger walked in, wearing a heavy parka and holding a topographic map of the mountain. He didn't look at me. He looked at the map, tracing a red line along the western ridge with a gloved finger. The sensors on the Black Diamond Run are throwing error codes, he said, his voice unusually tight. Maintenance says it's a calibration issue, but I want eyes on it. I need you to go up there, Candace. I paused, the coffee pot hovering over my mug. Black Diamond is closed for the season, Dad. It's unstable. Why do we care about sensors on a dormant run? Because Apex is sending their due diligence team next week? He snapped, finally looking up. His eyes were bloodshot, the look of a man who hadn't slept in days. If their inspectors find faulty equipment, it tanks the valuation. I need you to verify the structural integrity of the upper pylons. Take the snowmobile. Go alone. We don't need the staff asking questions. My stomach turned. It was a suicide mission in these conditions, but the mention of the Apex valuation triggered my protective instinct for the resort. If there was a problem, I had to fix it before he used it as an excuse to sell for pennies on the dollar. I took the keys from the counter. I'll be back by noon. The ride up the mountain was brutal. The Polaris snowmobile roared against the wind, its tracks biting into the hard-packed ice. The Black Diamond Run was a steep, narrow chute flanked by jagged limestone cliffs. It was beautiful and deadly, a place where even expert skiers hesitated. When I reached the upper ridge, I killed the engine. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the whistling of wind through the pine trees. I dismounted and walked toward the sensor array attached to Pylon 4. The snow here was deep, uncompacted powder that hid treacherous crevices. I checked the equipment. The wiring was intact. The battery levels were normal. There was no error code. Strange, I muttered, pulling out my radio. Base, this is Candace. Pylon 4 is green. Repeat, Pylon 4 is green. Who reported the fault? Static. I tried again. Base, do you copy? Nothing but white noise. Then a sound cut through the wind, a sharp, distinct crack from high above the ridgeline. It wasn't the sound of ice shifting. It was the sound of an explosive charge, the kind used for controlled avalanche mitigation. But there was no scheduled mitigation today. I looked up. A massive cornice of snow hanging over the cliff edge like a frozen wave detached itself in slow motion. It fell shattering on the rocks below and triggered a chain reaction. The entire face of the mountain seemed to liquefy. A wall of white death 20 feet high and moving at 60 miles an hour was rushing straight for me. I turned to run back to the snowmobile, but the deep powder swallowed my boots. The roar became deafening, a physical force that vibrated in my chest. I had time for one thought: he sent me here. The impact felt like being hit by a freight train. The snow slammed into me, crushing the air from my lungs, snapping my ribs like dry twigs. I was tumbled, spun, and dragged down the chute, my body colliding with hidden rocks. Darkness swallowed me. I didn't know which way was up. I clawed at the snow, screaming without sound, until my head slammed against something hard, a granite outcropping that stopped my descent. I lay there half buried, my legs twisted at an unnatural angle, my chest burning with every shallow breath. The silence returned heavier than before. I was alive, but barely. My right arm was pinned, but my left hand was free. I fumbled for the radio clipped to my jacket. The red light was still blinking. Mayday. I wheezed, tasting blood. Mayday. Avalanche on Black Diamond. Candace is down. I need immediate extraction. I waited. The radio crackled. A voice came through, clear and unmistakable. It wasn't the usual dispatcher, Sarah. It was a man's voice, rough, unfamiliar. Copy that, Unit 1. Signal is breaking up. Too much interference. Hold your position. I can't hold, I screamed, panic rising. I'm injured, I'm bleeding, GPS coordinates are active. Sorry, Unit 1, can't hear you. Try again in, let's say 2 hours. The line went dead. I stared at the radio in my freezing hand. The realization hit me harder than the avalanche. The sensor error was a lie. The explosion wasn't an accident. And the man on the radio wasn't there to save me. He was there to make sure I didn't come back. Roger hadn't just sent me to check a sensor. He had sent me to my execution. I looked at my watch. 10:14 a.m. If I fell asleep now, the hypothermia would stop my heart before noon. I dragged myself inch by inch toward the shelter of the rock, my paralyzed legs dragging uselessly behind me in the snow, leaving a trail of crimson red against the blinding white. I wasn't going to die. Not today. I had to live long enough to sign something other than my own death warrant. The cold of the mountain faded, replaced by the sterile freeze of the trauma bay. I was back in the room where my father had just delivered his ultimatum. The neurosurgeon, Dr. Evans, stood motionless, his gloved hands hovering over the chart where Roger had just scrawled his refusal. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic accusatory beeping of my heart monitor. "Mr. Vance," Dr. Evans said, his voice tight with suppressed rage, "I need you to understand what you just did. Without this decompression, the swelling will crush her brainstem. You aren't just refusing surgery, you are actively choosing to end her life." Roger didn't even blink. He capped his expensive fountain pen with a sharp click that echoed like a gunshot. "I made my position clear, doctor. My daughter would not want to live as a cripple. We are sparing her that indignity. Now, if you'll excuse us, my wife and I have arrangements to make." He turned to leave, placing a hand on the small of Beverly's back. She looked pale, not from grief, but from the inconvenience of it all. They took 2 steps toward the exit, confident that their legal status as next of kin gave them the power of life and death over me. I tried to lift my hand to make a sound, but the paralysis was a heavy stone on my chest. I watched them walk away, taking my future with them. Then the double doors of the emergency department burst open with such force that they banged against the walls. "Stop!" The voice boomed through the corridor, deep and commanding. Roger froze. Standing in the doorway was Arthur Hayes, my grandfather's personal attorney and oldest friend. He was 70 years old, leaning on a cane, but he looked like a titan. Flanking him were 2 large men in dark suits, private security, and in his raised hand was a thick legal file. Roger spun around, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. "Hayes, what the hell are you doing here? This is a private family matter." "There is nothing private about murder." "Roger," Mr. Hayes snarled, stepping into the room. He ignored my father and marched straight to Dr. Evans. He slammed the file down onto the nurse's station counter. "I am Arthur Hayes, legal counsel for Candace Vance. You are to disregard any instructions given by this man or his wife immediately." "Now wait just a minute," Roger shouted, stepping forward. "I am her father. I am her next of kin. You have no standing here." Mr. Hayes turned slowly, fixing Roger with a look of pure loathing. "Next of kin only applies when there is no designated agent. You seem to have forgotten that Candace is not just your daughter. She is a businesswoman who knows exactly who her enemies are." He opened the file and pulled out a document with a gold notary seal. "Doctor, this is a durable power of attorney for healthcare, signed, witnessed, and notarized 2 years ago. In it, Ms. Vance explicitly designates me, Arthur Hayes, as her sole medical proxy in the event of incapacitation. It specifically contains a rogue agent clause that strips Roger and Beverly Vance of any decision-making power regarding her health." Dr. Evans grabbed the document, scanning it quickly. His shoulders dropped in relief. "It looks valid. It's dated and stamped." "It's a forgery," Beverly shrieked, her composure finally cracking. "She never told us about this. She trusts us." "She feared you," Hayes corrected, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "She sat in my office and told me that if she ever ended up in a hospital bed, you would try to pull the plug to get to the trust fund. I didn't want to believe her then. I thought she was being paranoid. But looking at you now, God help me, she was right." Roger lunged for the papers, but one of the security guards stepped in his path, a solid wall of muscle. Roger recoiled, straightening his jacket, trying to regain some shred of dignity. "You're making a mistake, Hayes. If she survives this surgery, she'll be a vegetable. You're draining the estate for a lost cause. That is not your concern anymore, Hayes said. He turned his back on them and looked at Dr. Evans. Doctor, as her legal proxy, I authorize the surgery. Do whatever you have to do to save her. Spare no expense. We're prepping the OR now, Dr. Evans barked, already moving. Let's move, people, we have a window of 20 minutes. The room exploded into action. Nurses began unlocking the wheels of my stretcher. IV bags were swapped. The energy shifted from mourning to fighting. As they began to wheel me out, I looked toward the door one last time. Roger stood there, his face purple with impotence. He realized that the death certificate he was waiting for wasn't coming. The obstacle to his sale was still breathing. You'll hear from my lawyers, Roger yelled at Hayes's back. I look forward to it, Hayes replied without turning around. Now get out of my sight before I have security throw you out. Roger and Beverly didn't wait. They didn't ask to stay in the waiting room. They didn't ask to see me one last time before I went under the knife. They simply turned and walked out of the hospital angry, not that I might die, but that I might live. As the doors swung shut behind them, Mr. Hayes walked alongside my stretcher. He looked down at me, his eyes filled with tears. He placed a warm, trembling hand on my shoulder. I've got you, kid, he whispered. You just fight. You hear me? You fight. The lights of the hallway blurred above me as we picked up speed. The anesthesia mask was placed over my face. For the first time since the avalanche, I wasn't afraid. I took a deep breath of the gas, and as the darkness took me, I held on to one thought: I'm coming back for you. Waking up felt like surfacing from the bottom of a frozen lake. The light was harsh, piercing my eyelids, and every nerve in my body screamed in protest. I blinked, trying to focus on the ceiling tiles. I wasn't in the morgue. I was in the ICU, surrounded by machines that hummed and clicked with reassuring rhythm. I tried to move my legs. A jolt of pain shot up my spine, sharp, hot, and beautiful. Pain meant feeling. Feeling meant the nerves were still firing. Easy, Candace. Easy. Mr. Hayes was sitting in a plastic chair by my bedside, looking like he had aged 10 years in 3 weeks. He put down a stack of newspapers and leaned forward. The surgery was a success. You have feeling in your toes. You're going to walk again. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry as sandpaper. He held a cup of water with a straw to my lips. Where are they? I rasped. Gone? Hayes said, his voice hardening. Roger and Beverly haven't visited once. Whitney came by yesterday, took a selfie with your comatose body for Instagram, and left. I closed my eyes, letting the bitterness settle. Figures. There's more, Hayes said. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick document. While you were under, Roger has been busy. He used the hospital admission forms, specifically the ones listing you in critical condition, to invoke an emergency clause in the corporate bylaws. He handed me the papers. I scanned them, my vision still blurry but clearing rapidly with rage. It was a minutes of meeting for an emergency shareholder vote. He claimed you were incapacitated indefinitely, Hayes explained. He forged your signature on a temporary proxy assignment giving him your voting rights for 30 days. Using that majority vote, he pushed through the acquisition deal with Apex Resorts. He sold it, I whispered. He sold Silver Peaks. The preliminary agreement is signed. Hayes nodded grimly. The closing ceremony is scheduled for the Winter Gala. That's in 48 hours. Once he countersigns the final deed at that party, Apex takes ownership. They plan to announce the demolition of the main lodge the same night. I stared at the forged signature on the document. It was a good copy, shaky enough to look like I had signed it under duress or illness. Roger had thought of everything. He had turned my survival into a tool for his greed. Can we stop it legally? I asked. File an injunction. We could, Hayes said, but court battles take months. By the time a judge rules, Apex will have already gutted the resort, and Roger will have disappeared with the money to a non-extradition country. He knows the law, Candace. He's counting on the bureaucracy to be slower than his jet. I looked at the calendar on the wall. 48 hours. My body was broken, stitched together with titanium and hope. I couldn't fight him physically. I couldn't outrun him legally. But I knew something he didn't. Mr. Hayes. I said, my voice gaining strength. Does anyone else know I'm awake? The doctors? The nurses? Only Dr. Evans and the night shift team. I made sure of it. Good. I handed the papers back to him. Tell Dr. Evans to keep my chart sealed. As far as the world is concerned, I am still in a coma. Or better yet, I woke up but I'm broken. Hayes raised an eyebrow. What are you planning? Roger needs me out of the way, but he also needs to look like a grieving, burdened father to the public. I set a plan forming in the cold clarity of my mind. If I sue him now, he fights. If I confront him now, he runs. But if I let him think he's won, if I let him think I'm exactly the vegetable he predicted I would be. I looked at my legs, then back at Hayes. I'm going to give him exactly what he wants. I'm going to be the helpless invalid daughter. I want him to bring me to that house. I want him to feel safe enough to brag. And I want him to bring the final papers to me. You want to trap him, Hayes realized. I want to destroy him, I corrected. Prepare the discharge papers. I'm going home. And Hayes, get me a wheelchair, a big one. Hayes looked at me for a long moment, then a slow, shark-like smile spread across his face. He tapped the file on his knee. I'll have the car ready in the morning, and Candace. There's one more thing you should know. The forensic report on the snowmobile came back. The brake line wasn't just frozen. It was cut. I nodded slowly. I didn't need the report to know that. I had felt the brakes fail. Add it to the pile, Arthur. When we drop the hammer, I want to make sure they never crawl out from under it. The Vance estate was a fortress of glass and timber, designed to impress guests rather than comfort its inhabitants. Mr. Hayes had arranged for a private ambulance to transport me from the hospital to the mansion's service entrance, bypassing the paparazzi stationed at the main gate. I was wheeled into the guest wing on the ground floor, a strategic choice by Roger, no doubt to keep me out of sight from the main living areas where he conducted his business. I sat in the oversized wheelchair, a blanket draped over my legs, my head lolling slightly to the left. I had practiced this expression in the hospital mirror for hours. Vacant eyes, slack jaw, the look of someone whose lights were on but nobody was home. Well, Roger said, walking into the room with a glass of scotch in hand. He didn't ask how I was. He walked around the wheelchair like he was inspecting a damaged piece of furniture. At least she's quiet. The doctor said there might be some cognitive drool, but she seems manageable. Beverly followed him in, carrying a bowl of lukewarm oatmeal. She looked impeccable in her cashmere sweater, not a hair out of place. It's tragic, really, she said, her voice devoid of any real emotion. She sat on the edge of the bed and held a spoonful of oats to my mouth. Open up, Candace. Mommy's here. I let a little bit of the oatmeal spill down my chin. It took every ounce of my willpower not to slap the spoon out of her hand. Instead, I swallowed and stared blankly at the wall. See? Roger chuckled, taking a sip of his drink. She's gone, Bev. The lights are out. Hayes was bluffing about her recovery. She can't even wipe her own face, let alone run a company. So the deal is safe? Beverly asked, wiping my chin with a rough napkin. Safe, it's done. Roger grinned. The Apex team is arriving tomorrow night for the winter gala. We sign the final transfer deed at 9 p.m. By midnight, the wire transfer hits our offshore account in the Caymans. $50 million tax-free. And what about her? Beverly gestured to me with the spoon. We put her in a long-term care facility in Switzerland. Roger shrugged. Out of sight, out of mind. We'll tell people she needs specialized mountain air for her recovery. In 6 months, who will even remember Candace Vance? Whitney breezed into the room, then smelling of expensive perfume and entitlement. She was wearing a dress that likely cost more than my nurses made in a year. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. God, she looks awful, Whitney said, pulling out her phone. She snapped a photo of me drooling slightly. Can I post this #pray for Candace? It'll get crazy engagement. No social media until after the deal closes, Roger warned. We need to control the narrative. Now let's get this over with. He pulled a document from his jacket pocket. It was the permanent transfer of authority form. This was the key. The temporary proxy he forged was shaky, but if I signed this, if I voluntarily abdicated my position as trustee, his power would be absolute and unchallengeable. Candace, sweetheart. Roger leaned in close, his breath smelling of alcohol and greed. Can you hear Daddy? We need to help you. You can't work anymore. You're sick. Bills are piling up. We need you to let Daddy take care of things. He placed the pen in my limp hand. He wrapped his fingers around mine, guiding them toward the signature line. Just a little mark, honey. That's all we need. Just let go. I let my hand tremble. I let out a soft, pathetic moan. Tears, real tears of rage, welled up in my eyes. To them it looked like confusion. To me it was the fuel for what was coming. I allowed him to guide my hand, making a shaky, illegible scrawl on the paper. There. Roger pulled the paper away triumphantly. He kissed the signature. Good girl. You finally did something right. She needs rest, Beverly said, standing up and dusting off her skirt. Let's go. I need to finalize the catering for tomorrow. It has to be perfect. Yes? Roger agreed, looking at me with a sneer. Enjoy your nap, Candace. It's the last night you'll spend in this house. They left the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. I listened to their footsteps fade down the hallway. I waited 5 full minutes. Then I sat up straight. I wiped the oatmeal from my chin with the back of my hand. I reached under the collar of my hospital gown and pulled out the tiny, high-fidelity voice recorder Mr. Hayes had taped there. I pressed the stop button. The red light blinked once, confirming it had captured every word: the confession of fraud, the plan to dump me in Switzerland, the admission of the forged proxy. I wheeled myself over to the window. The sun was setting over Silver Peaks, casting long shadows across the snow. They thought I was a broken doll. They didn't know I was a Trojan horse. And tomorrow night, at their perfect gala, the walls were going to come tumbling down. The grand ballroom of Silver Peaks Lodge was a cathedral of wealth. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto the silk gowns of Denver's elite, while servers moved like ghosts through the crowd with trays of caviar and champagne. Roger Vance stood at the podium, bathed in a spotlight that made him look like a benevolent king. He wore a tuxedo that cost more than my first car, and his smile was wide, practiced, and utterly fake. Behind him, a massive LED screen displayed architectural renderings of Apex Heights, the generic glass towers that would soon replace the historic timber lodge my grandfather had built by hand. Seated in the front row were the executives from Apex Resorts, looking like sharks smelling blood in the water. Beverly and Whitney sat nearby, dabbing dry eyes with lace handkerchiefs, playing their roles to perfection. Ladies and gentlemen, Roger's voice boomed through the high-fidelity speakers. Thank you for joining us on this bittersweet evening. As many of you know, our beloved Silver Peaks has been in the Vance family for 3 generations. It is not just a resort. It is our home. He paused for effect, looking down at the floor as if overcome with emotion. But tragedy strikes when we least expect it. My daughter Candace, the heart and soul of this mountain, was taken from us in a horrific accident just weeks ago. She survives, thank God, but her injuries are catastrophic. She will require lifelong care, far away from the stress of this business. A murmur of sympathy rippled through the crowd. Roger looked up, his eyes glistening with crocodile tears. It was her wish, her final lucid request, that I take the burden of this company off her shoulders. She wanted Silver Peaks to evolve, And so it is with a heavy heart but a hopeful spirit that I announce the sale of this estate to Apex Resorts. This deal will secure the future of this mountain and provide the resources needed for Candace's recovery. He gestured to the table beside him where the final deed of transfer lay open, waiting for his signature. A gold pen glinted under the lights. The Apex CEO, a man named Sterling, stood up and buttoned his jacket, ready to claim his prize. To new beginnings, Roger said, raising a glass of champagne. The room applauded. He reached for the pen. The tip hovered millimeters above the paper. Click. The spotlight died. The chandeliers flickered and went dark. The room plunged into sudden, confused blackness. The applause died, instantly replaced by nervous whispers. Technical difficulties. Roger's voice cracked over the microphone. Someone check the breakers. Then the massive LED screen behind him roared to life. It wasn't showing the renderings anymore. It was showing grainy black and white footage from a security camera. The timestamp in the corner read, October 14th, 11:42 p.m. The image was unmistakable: Roger and Beverly standing in the trauma bay of Denver Health. The audio, enhanced and crystal clear, blasted through the ballroom speakers. I told you, no surgery. When there is a death certificate, then I will sign. Until then, stop wasting our time. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. Roger froze, the pen slipping from his fingers and clattering onto the podium. The video cut. A new audio clip began to play. This one was intimate, whispered with the ambient hum of a bedroom in the background. She's gone, Bev. The lights are out. We put her in a long-term care facility in Switzerland. Out of sight, out of mind. Just a little mark, honey. That's all we need. Just let go. Beverly stood up, knocking her chair over. Turn it off. She screamed, her voice shrill and terrifying. Someone turn it off. But the screen changed again. It showed a document, the forensic report from the Colorado State Police. A red circle highlighted a single paragraph: brake line on Polaris snowmobile was manually severed with a serrated tool. Evidence of tampering is conclusive. The ballroom was silent now. Deadly silent. The kind of silence that precedes an execution. The double doors at the back of the room swung open. A shaft of light from the hallway cut through the darkness. I stood there. I wasn't in a wheelchair. I wasn't wearing a hospital gown. I was wearing a black tailored suit. My back straight, my head held high. Mr. Hayes stood beside me, holding a briefcase like a weapon. I walked down the center aisle. My steps echoed on the hardwood floor. Click, click, click. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I saw shock on every face, shock and then dawn of realization. I walked past the Apex executives who were now furiously typing on their phones. I walked past Whitney, who looked like she was about to vomit. I climbed the stairs to the stage. Roger backed away from the podium, his face the color of ash. He looked small. He looked like exactly what he was, a thief caught in the act. I reached out and took the microphone from the stand. My hand didn't shake. Good evening, everyone. I said, my voice calm, cold, and steady. I apologize for the interruption. My father seems to have omitted a few details from his speech. I turned to Roger. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The document my father was about to sign is invalid, I announced to the room. The proxy he used to authorize this sale was obtained through fraud, coercion, and the exploitation of a medical crisis he engineered. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my pocket. This, I held it up, is the original last will and testament of Earl Vance. Clause 7, Section A, the unworthy heir provision. It states that any beneficiary who attempts to cause physical harm or death to the primary trustee shall immediately forfeit all shares, dividends, and interests in the Vance estate. I looked at the Apex CEO. Mr. Sterling, your contract is with a man who owns nothing. His shares were voided the moment that video played. If you sign that paper, you are buying a lawsuit, not a resort. Sterling looked at Roger, then at me. He closed his folder. "We're done here," he said, and walked off the stage. "Candace," Roger whispered, his voice trembling. "Please. We can explain. It was the stress. We were trying to protect you." "Protect me?" I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You tried to bury me." I turned back to the crowd. "The bar remains open. Please enjoy the champagne. It's on the house. But the Vances are leaving." I pointed to the side exit where two uniformed police officers had just appeared. Mr. Hayes had timed it perfectly. They walked onto the stage, handcuffs glinting under the emergency lights. "Roger Vance, Beverly Vance," the officer said, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and corporate embezzlement." Roger looked at me one last time as they cuffed his hands behind his back. "I'm your father," he pleaded. "I gave you life." "And then you tried to take it back for a check," I replied. "Now we're even." The aftermath of my speech was not chaotic. It was surgical. As the police escorted Roger and Beverly off the stage, the guests watched in stunned silence, their champagne flutes forgotten in their hands. The Apex executives, realizing they had nearly purchased a crime scene, scrambled to distance themselves. Mr. Sterling, who minutes ago had been eager to shake my father's hand, was now shouting into his phone, demanding his legal team retract the preliminary agreement immediately. I watched from the podium as the officers led my parents toward the side exit. Roger was still babbling about a misunderstanding, about family loyalty, about how he had done everything for me. Beverly was silent, her face a mask of ruined vanity, as she realized there would be no more galas, no more country clubs, only a cold cell and a court-appointed attorney. Whitney was the only one left. She stood near the buffet table, clutching her designer clutch like a lifeline. When she saw me step down from the stage, she ran toward me, tears streaming down her face. Real tears this time, born of terrifying uncertainty. "Candace," she sobbed, grabbing my arm. "You can't let them take Mom and Dad. Where am I going to go? They froze my cards. They locked the house." I looked at her hand on my sleeve. I gently but firmly removed it. "You're 24 years old, Whitney. You have a college degree you never used, and a closet full of clothes worth more than most people's homes. I suggest you start selling them." "But I'm your sister," she wailed, her voice rising in panic. "We're family. You can't just throw me out on the street." "I'm not throwing you on the street," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket. I pulled out a single sheet of paper Mr. Hayes had prepared earlier that morning. "I'm giving you notice. This is a formal eviction order from the estate. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. You are also removed as a beneficiary of the family trust, effective immediately." Whitney stared at the paper, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. You can't do this. Dad said you were weak. He said you were broken." "Dad was wrong," I said quietly. "I wasn't broken. I was just waking up." I walked past her, out the double doors and onto the terrace. The cold mountain air hit my face sharp and clean, scrubbing away the scent of expensive perfume and lies. I stood at the railing, looking out over the valley. The lights of the snowcats grooming the runs twinkled in the distance, tiny stars in the darkness. Mr. Hayes joined me a moment later. He didn't say a word. He just handed me a pen and a clipboard. On it was a standard legal form, refusal of bail bond surety. By signing it, I was formally declaring that the Vance estate would not post bail for Roger or Beverly Vance. They would await trial in jail. I looked at the document. It was in a way the death certificate my father had been waiting for, not mine, but his. It was the death of his greed, his control, and his cruelty. I uncapped the pen. The ink flowed smoothly onto the paper as I signed my name, Candace Vance, trustee. "It's done," Hayes said softly. "No," I replied, handing the clipboard back to him. I looked up at the moon hanging over Silver Peaks. "It's just beginning." The screen fades to black, leaving only the sound of wind whistling through the pines, wild and free. Conclusion and reflection. Candace's story is a brutal reminder that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us are the ones we need protection from. We are taught that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water. But what happens when that blood becomes toxic? Candace didn't just survive an avalanche, she survived a betrayal that cuts deeper than any physical wound. Her victory wasn't just about keeping her money or her resort. It was about reclaiming her agency. She proved that you don't owe your life to people just because they gave it to you, especially when they try to take it back for a profit. Many of you watching might feel pressure to forgive toxic family members because that's what good people do. But Candace teaches us a different lesson. Forgiveness without accountability is just permission to be hurt again. Signing those papers wasn't an act of revenge, it was an act of survival. So I want to ask you, was Candace right to leave her parents in jail and cut off her sister? Or does family deserve a second chance no matter what? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more tales of justice served cold. Stay safe, and remember, your life belongs to you alone.